When you look back at the history of humanity, you'll notice that over the period of time that we've been on this planet and able to study humanity, that the only times that we actually had any kind of restrictions on our diet was when there was like a famine, when there was something going on that was out of our control. Now, if you look at like Native Americans, for example, if you look at Native Americans, you'll see that they primarily lived off corn, but there was other things that they added into their diet. Or if you look at the Irish, they lived primarily off of potatoes, but they also added things into their diet. It wasn't just potatoes. It wasn't just corn. It wasn't just this. If you look at the Asians, they weren't just eating rice. They were adding other things into it. And if you look at once we started moving out of the cities, especially in America, which is where I live. Once we started moving out of the cities and started relying on automobiles, you started seeing all kinds of weird diets coming out, and like women out with those belt things going back and forth. If I can find a picture, or a video, I'll put it here. Stuffing cotton in their mouth just so they weren't eating a lot. And I think one of the things that you notice that is the destruction of the human body basically is the car. Now, I don't mind public transportation. I have a car myself, but one of the best times I've ever had was when I was using a bike as my utilitarian purposes. So like if I needed to go to the grocery store, if I needed to go do this or that, I would actually use my bike or walk. And all of these extreme diets came about after we started living out in the burbs, the suburbs. Now, I don't know other countries if they're still kind of like they had a town center and you could walk. I think a lot of other countries, especially in Europe, are like that. I think a lot of Asian countries are still like that. America completely threw that out in the trash. They're like, no, you're going to have to drive everywhere. It's very hard to ride bike here. It really is. It can be done. And especially if you live in the city, it's a little bit more doable. But when you live out in the burbs, man, they'd rather run you over. So I think one of the things that we have to look at is these extreme diets that everybody's proposing are a little like out of hand, and they make people want to binge. Whereas if you look at like people like, I always use my family, for example. But if I look at my family from back in the day, they did not restrict, and they were all skinny, and they did have cars. They worked, they had cars, they lived in town, so they could walk to different places. There's where I live at the end of every single block, there's shops, right? So you can walk to the shops. People just hop in a car. And I think one of the things that you really want to watch out for is these extreme diets, even to this day, don't really work all that well. But if you look at a kind of version of the extreme diets is like the Irish, the Asians, the Native Americans. If you're in America, their primary source of fuel was corn or whatever, squash and different things that they could grow. Everybody wants to say that they were going to kill animals for everything, and they did, but primarily they were using this stuff. I mean, they used every single piece of the animal. But they were building clothing, shelter, and everything else with it. They weren't out there because they needed to be carnivores. They were doing it because it's the only way to survive. When you move out of where we're supposed to live in the tropics into an area that we can't survive in, every animal that lives in this environment can survive in this environment except for us. We need housing, we need jackets, we need hoodies, we need insulated pants, we need all that kind of extreme stuff that you wouldn't need in your natural environment. This is not a natural environment to us. So of course they were killing animals to get their skins to put over themselves because the animals actually can survive in this weather and we can't. So it's an unavoidable situation. We don't have that situation anymore. We're not out in 2-degree weather wondering where we're going to sleep that night, unless you're unfortunately homeless. Then that's your situation. That's what you have to deal with. But if you're not, for the majority of us who are not in that situation, you're going home to some kind of house or some housing or apartment or whatever it is that night. So you don't really need to have this animal killing thing going on. You can survive off what they primarily survived off of. I'm Irish, so I'm going to go back to the Irish. The Irish primarily lived off potatoes until the blight hit, and they were thriving. They were absolutely thriving. Now, of course, when they could afford it, they would add herring to it. They would add heavy cream. They would add milk. They would add just different things to it. Of course they did. They weren't restricting on purpose. This is just what they ate. They ate potatoes. Or if you go to the like the China study, and when they were going out into the not town centers, but to the outskirts of town, all these people really had was vegetables and rice. So this is what they ate, but they were skinny. The point of this video is, throughout history, we have primarily eaten carbohydrates with additional of meat. It wasn't like all meat. It wasn't like this huge thing right now with meat cures everything, or potatoes cure everything. And the bottom line is, the body heals itself. It doesn't need any outside sourcing. If you fast, I'm not a proponent of fasting, but if you fast, you will heal. Your body will heal. So it wasn't the food that you were eating that healed you. It was the lack of food that was healing you. All right. So it's when people talk about curing themselves on carnivore, they're coming off like the Dorito, or like, if it's the worst offenders is the vegans going on to the carnivore, because these vegans, most of these vegans who don't really want to tell you their diet, it was like broccoli juice, kale, like cauliflower, half a potato a week. I mean, this is the people coming off of the vegan diet for the most part, and they're going on to a carnivore diet. And of course, there's more calories, there's more everything. So of course, they're going to be healing themselves, of course. But even on the vegan life, like even on this high carb, low fat life, I mean, it's not that restrictive if you really look at it. Most of the food out there that is not tied to animals is high carb, low fat. Most of the food. So that's not restricting at all. It's not that but the carnivore thing is so restricting. You've got what? Beef, chicken, pork on occasion. I mean, I did it. I've done this diet. I did it. It was boring. It was boring. And the only time I would go to the bathroom, number two, is when I would have a huge binge on carbohydrates, and the next thing it's mass exodus. And everything's coming out. Everything that I had been storing up for how long was finally coming out. But these restrictions that we put on ourselves is so stressful. It's so ridiculous, especially this carnivore thing. And the people who attack you the most is the carnivores or the angry vegans. In the comment section, they attack you so much. It's crazy how much they attack everything that you do, because they're just miserable. They're so restrictive. They can't do anything. They can't even go to the restaurant. I mean, what are you going to do with the carnivore thing, going to a restaurant? Oh yeah, I'll just have a steak. But if there's butter on that, like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Just like get into your head how ridiculous this is. And people who are curing themselves, I mean, I can only imagine what their diets are. And most of the time, the people who are attacking you over the carnivore diet are somebody with one subscriber, no picture, no nothing. They've never made a video in their life. If they do have an Instagram, it's privated, so that you can't go in there and see what they actually, who they actually are. It's just, it's nuts. It's crazy to watch all of this going on. And I haven't made a video in about a week, because I'm getting kind of tired of the whole thing. The whole thing is just getting kind of out of hand. Like, I mean, obviously go do what you want to do. I mean, I'm not really here to change anybody's mind, but I am at the same time. I've had people asking me if I do coaching quite a bit lately. I did make a course. I do want to see how it goes, because, I really didn't restrict all that much when I lost all the weight. And I've kept 150 pounds off for the last 10 years. I lost all the weight by 2013, 2014 that I really wanted to lose. But these extremes are just, I mean, if you really follow human history, and how ridiculous this really looks to the people. Like, if people had, if they go watch us from whatever generation they're from, if they're from the 16, 17, 1500s or whatever, the things that we get upset over these days, or the things that the restrictions we put on ourselves with most of humanity. I mean, they could not go to a grocery store and just get this stuff. It wasn't possible, and then you got this crazy amount of just abundance of stuff, especially in, if you want to call this first world, and then we're all restricting. Now, I mean, most of the stuff that is in the grocery store is garbage. But really look at what we're doing here. I mean, look at how bored you have to be. Look how bored and like how much extra money and how bored you have to be to really be complaining about like the food and like, oh, I'm not going to eat that food. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to restrict myself. I'm going to starve myself. Everybody can't stand themselves. They don't want to even look at themselves in the mirror. They'll walk past a window at a shop and they can't look. I'll put blinders on. I'm too fat to see myself. I can't, I don't want to look. I don't want to look. And then you start ingraining that in your body, and your body's like, oh, we need to hate ourselves. And then you start hating yourself, and then you eat based on that, and you restrict yourself. And then you go do these crazy ass workouts because you just can't stand yourself, when it really doesn't need to be this hard, right? It does not need to be this hard. It really can be a lot more simple than this, especially if you're doing high carb, low fat. It's not that hard to find the food. Hell, for breakfast, I had bread. I think I had like a gram, maybe 1.5 grams of fat. I had like a lot of bread. I mean, but you can have whatever you want to. Like, you can start off with fruit, you can start off with starch, you can cereal. So there's no restriction here, basically. There's no restriction. And your body, if you're coming into this as somebody who is really overweight, chances are your leptin and ghrelin are so off that you are probably going to overeat in the beginning of your world into this. And if you are overeating, according to McDougall, it just burns off as, heat, or you pee it out, or whatever you do. It's like, there's so many studies that show how little fat is made from carbohydrates. It's crazy. Like, they did one study. I don't know which one it was. I know Victoria talked about it in the interview I did. I think this is the one she talked about. But there was one where they fed these women 1,500 extra calories a day, past what they would normally eat, of just plain sugar. And after 3 months, on average, the women gained 1/3 of a pound. And this is averaging 1,500 calories over every day. So when you first come into this, and I know this because I was 400 some odd pounds. When you first come into this, you are going to eat like crazy. You are going to eat like crazy. You're going to finally just take that breath. I'm not going to restrict myself anymore. Like, really cut back, if not altogether, on exercise. Just let yourself heal. You're just going to eat, and just eat the right foods, right? And eventually your leptin and ghrelin, which I'm not going to get into in this video, are going to catch up to you. And you will notice that if you were having 5 pounds of potatoes for dinner, you're only going to be able to have like 3 pounds or 2 pounds or something, like, at some point. It's weird. It just happens out of nowhere. It just happens. You're like, oh, wow. Because you'll make the 5 pounds, and you're like, oh, man, there's no way I can finish that. And that's when you really start noticing a lot of magic happening in the metabolism, the body, the leptin, the ghrelin. Your sleep starts coming back online. You're not having these crazy binges anymore. You're not having even the thought of binging. But I don't even think of binging anymore. It doesn't even enter my mind. Like I was at my parents' house yesterday. I had to build them a computer. They had like cookies and stuff like that out. I don't even want it. I don't even want it. So you do get to a point where that's not a thing. That's not a part of your life anymore. You do get to a point where you can just eat what you need to eat, and you will start getting those hunger signals back online. You'll start getting the intuition of when you need to eat, how much you need to eat, and all that kind of stuff back online. That'll all come. It's not going to be this force feeding yourself for forever. The people who run into that are the people who are like, all right, I'm going to do Start Solution for this week. I'm going to do 50-50 plate the week after. I'm going to do Raw till 4 the week after that. And then after that, I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. And then maybe in 5 weeks, then we'll come back to Start Solution. Those are the people that are going to always suck at losing weight. It's always going to suck because you can't do that. You have. Now, I've heard people say that you got to give one diet like 3 years. Now, I don't really agree with that one. I have seen the high carb work really fast, but really fast relative to me. And admittedly, when I first got onto this, I had, what job did I have? Oh, I had a banking job, actually. I had a banking job when I first got into this. I wasn't exactly doing much of anything. And then that job kind of dissolved itself, and I could not, Philly is so hard to find work in Philly. So I had like 12 months where I could not find anything. Couldn't find anything. And so anyway, so I was doing the Couch to 5K for like the whole summer. And I went back to the bank that I worked at, and they didn't even know who I was. I had to show them my ID, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you work," you know, because they all knew who I was, but they didn't recognize me. They thought I was like trying to a fraud getting into somebody else's account. And then a couple years later, I had to go to a wedding here because I lived in Philly at the time, and I had to come back to Cleveland for a wedding. And my parents were having to introduce me to my own family. So I know it works. I lost 150 some odd pounds. 10% or less fat, I think, is ideal. If you're looking to be ultra, 10 grams is where you want to be. If you want to be just you, like in the average meat suit that you came in, then the 10% of fat is definitely more agreeable to the diet. Anyways, I think that's it. I am going to start coaching. If you've made it this far, let me know down below if you're interested in that. I'm going to do it via email, probably in the beginning, and then Zoom calls. But let's get into this while it's not even spring yet. I think technically it's still winter. So you can really, if you really want to have that beach look or whatever, depending on where you're at, you still might be able to do that by then. But these extremes are just extreme, and they are just ridiculous. They're absolutely ridiculous. I know so many people who have just done high carb, low fat, and that is not restrictive in and itself, and have lost a ton of weight. Even within the high carb, low fat, even if, like I said, like the Star Solution, 50-50 plate, raw till 4, if you keep rotating those things out, you got to just pick one, man. Just got to pick one and run with it. Give it like 6 months. Think about it. It's already March. This year just started, and it's already March. So think about this. And yeah, anyways, comments, questions down below. Let me know if you're interested, and then we can just do back and forth through email, and we'll go from there. Anyway, talk to you in the next video. Like, subscribe.